So I came across a video on Twitter the other day which was produced by Christian apologist Frank Turek's ministry. In it, Turek briefly addressed the idea of a multiverse, and I thought it really missed the mark.
What some scientists have suggested in recent years is there are multiple universes out there. In order to avoid the implication of design, they're going to say if there's a number of universes out there, billions of them, then maybe one of them is going to have these conditions by chance. There's a number of problems with this called the multiverse theory. One of the problems is there's no evidence for it. It's pure speculation. We can't observe these other universes. Second problem with it is that it would seem that if these other universes are out there, they would need to be created too, so you don't seem to get rid of the need for a creator, you multiply the need for a creator, right? So, and there's many other problems as well with the theory. So that's what they've tried to do to avoid the implications of design. But no, this one universe is so precisely tweaked that secular scientists are going to these extreme measures to avoid the obvious implication that it's designed.
Naturally, I thought it was absurd to suggest that scientists just make things up to deny God's existence, so I replied with this. Wow, that was really bad. He thinks scientists just make up these hypotheses to combat theological ideas they don't like? He really doesn't seem to understand that STEM fields don't work like devotional theology. It isn't just a polemical game. I was curious to see if there was more to the video, so I found it on YouTube. There wasn't any more to it, but I checked out the comments and found that almost all the top comments had a similar theme. Multiverse hypothesis is a desperate attempt by atheists to avoid the fine-tuning argument. Multiverse universe, atheist fairy tale, fantasy that atheists cling to out of desperation in order to run away from the truth. Scientists are going to extreme measures to avoid the evidence that the universe is designed. Multiverse is atheists' attempt at theologicalizing their religion of atheism. Unfortunately, they create an even larger burden of proof through this sorry belief. Yeah, I mean, I don't know why, but I was actually pretty astounded that this many people legitimately entertain the narrative that scientists just make things up in order to deny God. At least back when I was a creationist, I thought evolutionists were sincere about their ideas. But anyway, my curiosity about this idea of Turek's didn't stop there, so I looked around to see if he had released any other videos about the subject. I quickly found out that he had, and that it just gets worse from here. Now, before I continue, I want to clarify that my point in making this video is not to bash Turek personally, but to illustrate the stark contrast between the methodologies of scientific fields of study and those of devotional theology and apologetics. So if you're upset about what Turek has to say here, I totally get it, but consider channeling that anger into productive dialogue, like calmly pointing out fallacies and mistakes, rather than just hurling insults. I mean, you can use ad hominems if you want, but I think that precise, valid criticism is much more productive in actually combating issues of scientific illiteracy. Also, since we're dealing with as complex a topic as the idea of a multiverse, which comes from the field of quantum physics, a field which neither Turek nor myself have any expertise, I'm going to try to keep things simple in my explanations of any of the science involved. That said, for anyone who'd like to get into the science in greater depth, my sources are linked in the description and include some very accessible, entertaining videos on the multiverse. Okay, let's watch the video I'd like to address titled, "What About the Multiple Universe Theory?"
I've been hearing lately about the latest theories popping up, parallel universe, multiverse, to explain, it's just a myriad amount, incalculable amount of options, opportunities, and to finally, boom, the right universe came up. Can you give us something?
It's the multi-universe theory. For those of you that haven't heard about it, it is really a way of getting around the fine-tuning of the universe, because the atheists know that there's no real way to explain why we're here if there is no designer. And so what they've come up with is this multi-universe theory, that there are many universes out there, and ours just happens to be the one that is designed, even though it really isn't.
Alright, first of all, there is no multiverse theory. What physicists call the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics is a hypothetical implication of established mathematics within quantum mechanics. The idea is an unverified but educated guess based on observation. Actual scientists don't uphold this idea as fact. The only one acting as if they do is Turek. Second, the many worlds interpretation was not just made up one day sometime in recent years because an atheist scientist wanted to deny God's existence. It's actually a result of one possible interpretation of the mathematics involved in the field of quantum mechanics. Without getting into specifics of the math involved, here's the story. Quantum mechanics is a branch of physics which seeks to mathematically describe the motion and interaction of subatomic particles. Like other sets of scientific theories, quantum mechanics is based on experimentation and observation. While the mathematical principles we've formulated from this experimentation prove useful and precise in predicting the outcome of experiments involving subatomic particles, there's still little consensus on how those principles correspond to reality in non-mathematical terms. There are multiple interpretations of the mathematics involved in quantum mechanics, some dating back to the early 1900s. If you'd like to read about them, you'll find relevant links in my sources. In 1957, Hugh Everett proposed what he called the correlation interpretation in his Princeton PhD thesis, The Theory of the Universal Wave Function. It was very poorly received at the time. I mean, multiple worlds, that seems kind of ridiculous, but later it was actually popularized by theoretical physicist Bryce DeWitt as the many worlds interpretation. This interpretation, like all others, takes what we do know about quantum particles and their behavior and speculates about what that implies about the aspects of quantum particles which we don't know. It specifically says that all possible quantum states of all particles are physically realized in some universe, which may or may not mean that reality constantly splits and branches out with the interaction of quantum particles. It does not even attempt to address the supposed fine-tuning of the universe, and the interpretation was not informed by any theological position. It was informed by quantum mechanical principles. An important note just before we continue, this interpretation is, as of yet, unfalsifiable. It can't be proven wrong, and it can't be proven right. We don't have any direct way to test it. Scientists acknowledge this, though. Even those like Sean Carroll and the late Stephen Hawking, who take the interpretation seriously, exploring some of the specifics of its implications in their work, still treat the interpretation as hypothetical.
Now, there's a number of problems with these. I'm going to go through it very quickly. This is all in chapter 4 of the book. First of all, there's no evidence for this. It's purely speculative. It's not like they can observe these other universes. They're just saying, well, maybe there are other universes out there.
It is speculative in a way, yes. It's a reasonable hypothesis to suggest, but it isn't verified and it's unfalsifiable, at least for the time being. Maybe we'll never find a way to test it and it will always be that way. Scientists acknowledge this, so it isn't treated as fact like Turek is suggesting. Acting as if pointing this out is some kind of gotcha moment displays scientific illiteracy at best and dishonesty at worst. Reputable scientists don't just jump to conclusions as soon as they come up with a new idea and then receive praise for it. Quite the opposite, actually. They treat unverified hypotheses as unverified hypotheses because the scientific method and scientific community requires them to do so if they want to make any real progress in their field. All the work a scientist publishes is subject to peer review, which is a process where other scientists and researchers tediously dissect every detail of that work, looking for and pointing out its every flaw. If a scientist makes the mistake of treating an unverified hypothesis as anything more than that within their work, the peer review process will expose their shoddy work and possibly destroy their entire reputation. So if you're going to criticize those who uphold such hypotheses as fact, which should be done in my opinion, make sure you specify who you're talking about. Don't get on the case of reputable scientists, atheists or not, when your criticism really just applies to people who have watched too much Rick and Morty.
Also, multiple universes would multiply the need for a creator because each one would need creation to get started. And there was a bunch of scientists named Vilenkin, Board, and Guth. They found even a multiverse needs an absolute beginning. So you're just putting the problem off one step. You're not solving the problem.
Yeah, if you presuppose a creator is involved, then sure, maybe more universes call for a more powerful creator. If you recognize the many worlds interpretation for what it is, an educated guess on how certain factors at the quantum scale affect the development of the cosmos, you realize that this criticism is irrelevant. Criticism of a hypothesis derived from a naturalistic method of investigation is only effective if it actually contradicts that hypothesis' implications. This interpretation is not an attempt to kill God or prove naturalism once and for all. It's just a result of mathematics, and no matter how problematic its implications are for the comparably unfalsifiable hypothesis that there is a creator, the basis of this hypothesis is not undermined. If you don't want people to uphold it as fact, point out that it's an unverifiable hypothesis. If you want to falsify the hypothesis entirely, I'm sorry, but that would take actual scientific testing or some mathematical proof. Pointing out its conflict with other unfalsifiable hypotheses, like Turek's idea of a creator god, just won't cut it. Now to address the reference to the scientist he cites here. He's referring to something called the BVG theorem, which uses classical mechanics to deduce that a universe which has been expanding throughout its history cannot have an infinite past, but must have a past space-time boundary. Put very simply, it's the idea that a universe that, like ours, has been consistently expanding must have started expanding at some point. If true, it could conflict with the many worlds interpretation. The BVG theorem is a deduction taken from classical mechanics. It, like the many worlds interpretation, is an implication of certain mathematics within physics, just a different part of physics. It has not yet been verified or falsified. So saying that Borde, Guth, and Vilenkin found this theorem to be true is a misrepresentation. Funnily enough, it's the exact same type of misrepresentation that Turek accuses atheistic scientists of, saying a hypothesis has been confirmed when it hasn't.
And who or what is keeping these universes from colliding?
There actually has been some work done on the question of whether or not separate universes could interact, but it's all hypothetical from my understanding. Just to be clear, though, the many worlds interpretation does not imply that there are other universes out there just floating around in space like other galaxies and they could crash into us. It doesn't strictly imply whether or not these universes could interact at all, from my understanding. So this is a question we should ask, but it's far from a gotcha question for the interpretation.
And then this multiplies as causes beyond necessity, because multiple universes, you're asking multiple universes to be the cause rather than just one supernatural cause.
Okay, but this hypothesis is in no way an attempt at a full explanation for how the cosmos came into being. It's one conceivable implication of well-established mathematics. If it brings up more questions about the nature of the cosmos, then fine. It isn't meant to answer all of our burning questions about our origins. That's not really how science works. Sometimes you just have to take things one step at a time according to what evidence is available rather than just making stuff up. There's some hypocrisy in this objection as well. Earlier, Turek acted as if the interpretation's unfalsifiability was a nail in its coffin, but now he's implying its inferiority to another hypothesis, our supernatural creation, which is just as unfalsifiable. You can't have it both ways, Turek. Perhaps we should treat unfalsifiable hypotheses as unfalsifiable and unprovable until we find ways to reliably test them. Scientists already do that, but I can't say the same for apologists. Is the concept of testing the predictions of an idea or model like even a thing in theology?
And the other problem is this is an atheist admission of evidence for design, and that design is detectable. You know, they'll say intelligent design is not science, yet they know it is because they can detect design through the fine-tuning argument and say, well, it really looks design, so we're going to try and find a way of explaining this without a designer.
If you think this interpretation was literally only made up because an atheist got mad at the idea of believing in a god and wanted an excuse not to, then sure. If you know the actual origins of the interpretation, though, you know this is blatantly false. I'm sure it's nice to believe that you're so obviously right that everyone agrees with you, and those who say they don't are just pretending. If you care about accurately representing the ideas and individuals you oppose, though, throwing out this ridiculous generalization just doesn't work. It's actually kind of ironic that Turek is complaining about people making up ideas which only confirm their bias here, because he's fabricating an entire narrative about atheist scientists in order to prove his point about their hypocrisy.
So it doesn't help their position. In fact, Paul Davies, who is a cosmologist, an agnostic cosmologist from either Arizona State or University of Arizona, one of the two, he says the multiverse is a dodge. Nobody would be talking about multiple universes if this universe didn't appear to be so designed.
I tried to find the source of this quote, but couldn't. Paul Davies has had a prolific career, though, so it could be out there and maybe I just missed it. In my attempt to find this quote, though, I found something else from Paul Davies which demonstrates Turek's misuse of Davies' work here. Paul Davies is an outspoken critic of the many worlds interpretation as an explanation for life's seemingly unlikely existence, but when he explains why, it becomes clear that Turek is way out of his depth in his handling of the issue.
I think the main objection, it's just a philosophical, not a scientific objection, is that what you're doing is trying to explain the universe we see by appealing to, in this case, an infinite number of universes that we don't see, appealing to something outside of the universe. And that is no better than traditional theology, which simply says that there is an unexplained God outside of the universe that is necessary to explain what we see within the universe. I would like to try to find an explanation for the universe from entirely within it, without appealing to anything external. And as a matter of fact, I believe that if somebody did a proper mathematical analysis, they would find that the complexity of the explanation of the multiverse, an infinite number of universes we don't see, is the same as the complexity of the explanation of traditional theology, an infinitely complex God outside the universe that we don't see. They're really the same thing in different language. And so my point of view now is a plague on both your houses. We need to try to find the explanation for the universe from within it, from what we see, and not multiply these unseen entities.
Davies says that the many worlds interpretation is unfalsifiable and therefore of little use to science in ultimately explaining how or why the universe's constants came to allow for the development of life as we know it. To illustrate his point, he compares its uselessness to that of the hypothesis of a supernatural creator. You know, like the one that Turek touts as the superior hypothesis.
It's just come up along with the fine-tuning argument to try and prevent the obvious conclusion there's got to be a designer.
My final word on this is to say that it's clear from Turek's handling of this issue that apologetics like his are guilty of all the things Turek accuses multiverse proponents of. Instead of engaging with detractors on the basis of what the evidence may suggest and how hypotheses could be reliably tested, apologetics is often in the business of concocting unfalsifiable hypotheses like a supernatural creator god and calling them fact. A huge difference between scientific fields and the so-called academic field of devotional theology and apologetics is that scientific inquiry abides by a universally accepted, strict methodology which was designed to control for human fallibility. In the implementation of this method, we've seen undeniable and explosive progress around the world over the course of just a few centuries. In the world of devotional theology and apologetics, however, there is no strict methodology, there is no structure designed to control for human fallibility, and admittedly unfalsifiable claims can be touted as fact because there is no expectation, much less requirement, for proposed ideas to even be tested. Rarely do I find the wisdom of the popular biblical proverb found in Matthew 7:4-5 to be more applicable than when scientifically ignorant apologetics are invoked in an attempt to tackle scientific issues. How can you say to your brother, "Let me take the speck out of your eye," when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the plank out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Thanks for watching. I've been Drew of Genetically Modified Skeptic. A big thanks to my patrons who keep my channel up and running and who have been really great company in my patrons-only streams and hangouts. If you want to hear more from me, subscribe and follow me on social media at the handles below. If you're an apostate in need, there are resources linked in the description to help you find community and mental health support. Remember to always be kind to others in the comments, and until next time, stay skeptical.